Look at this microscopic red laser. If a user scans a pass with the wrong permissions, the turnstile simply locks. There's no guard, no physical struggle, and no immediate threat of violence, just a frictionless denial of entry by a digital system. This invisible barrier represents the defining architecture of our era. Power no longer relies on thick stone walls or physical force to keep people in line. The French philosopher Gilles Deleuze observed this transition in the late 20th century. Society, he argued, was moving away from institutions of confinement and replacing them with free-floating networks of continuous monitoring. He called this the society of control. It operates entirely on the principle of immanence. There is no transcendent authority issuing orders from a distant tower. The rules and constraints are embedded directly into the physical and digital environment itself. To understand the mechanics of this invisible cage, we have to deconstruct its primary target. The control society does not govern individuals. It actively dismantles the illusion that you are a unified human individual at all. An immanent system without physical walls is a far more totalizing form of capture than a traditional prison. You can plan an escape from a physical cell. You cannot escape a network that is everywhere, quietly calculating your permissions in the background. This photograph shows Michel Foucault, the philosopher who mapped out the previous era, the disciplinary society. His model was built on enclosed environments, like factories, schools, and prisons. Foucault described these physical and social enclosures as molds. A factory or a school rigidly stamps specific, desired behaviors into the subjects operating within its walls. But Deleuze recognized that by the late 20th century, these disciplinary institutions were breaking down. The hard borders between work, education, and private life were systematically dissolving. This compares Deleuze's alternative power mechanism. On the left, a rigid disciplinary mold. On the right, modulation, a cast continuously adapting to the stream. Every day, this becomes passwords and risk assessments. You are managed by a system constantly analyzing credentials. By shifting from a rigid mold to continuous modulation, the institution dissolves into the ambient environment. You never truly leave the factory, and you never actually exit the prison. In his magnum opus, Difference and Repetition, Deleuze makes a radical metaphysical claim. The unified, self-identical subject does not exist. This rejects centuries of philosophy. The Kantian and Hegelian traditions treat a centralized, coherent identity as the foundational truth of human consciousness. Deleuze argued that this center is an illusion. This maps passive syntheses. Consciousness is a temporary integration of chaotic forces coalescing into a shifting hub. Habits and desires fold into a self-aware whole before splintering back into streams. You become a mathematically divisible dividual, parsed into discrete datasets. The society of control relies entirely on this divisibility. It parses human beings into separate consumer profiles, credit ratings, and biometric markers. Algorithms and security networks are not tracking you. They are actively mining the separate, passive syntheses that compose you, bypassing your conscious identity entirely. This photograph from the failed uprisings of May 1968 in France marks the catalyst that pulled Deleuze's philosophy out of the abstract and into political economy. Deleuze partnered with Félix Guattari, a radical psychoanalyst and political activist. Together, they wrote Capitalism and Schizophrenia, linking unconscious desire directly to the mechanisms of economic production. They theorized that capitalism does not rely on rigid social codes to function. Instead, it operates as an axiomatic system. Capitalism survives by radically decoding and deterritorializing material flows. It strips labor and capital away from physical territories so they can move freely. Once freed, these flows undergo re-territorialization. They are bound back down, not to human communities, but to privatized metrics, property rights, and strict family structures. In this system, human worth is calculated as a real-time differential of surplus extraction. It is an axiomatic calculation, a fluctuating data point, not a static wage or a permanent social title. An economic system based on pure, continuous quantitative calculation is the perfect predatory match for a subject composed of differential forces. Axiomatic capitalism was built to capture the dividual. The abstract economics of continuous modulation map directly onto the physical reality of contemporary tracking technology, RFID chips, biometrics, and the vast harvesting of metadata. These networks are completely indifferent to your personal identity. They respond only to clearance levels and fluctuating risk profiles. In the disciplinary era, the factory boss monitored your physical body on the assembly line. Today, the algorithm monitors your invisible data shadow. This continuous data monitoring traps the individual in a state of perpetual assessment. You face endless continuing education, constantly shifting credit scores, and permanent performance reviews. Absolute control is finalized when external force is no longer required. It happens when the subject willingly internalizes the algorithm and self-modulates to optimize their own data profile. This dynamic prevents an obvious paradox. Despite continuous, granular monitoring, subjects in modern societies generally feel more geographically mobile and unconstrained than in previous eras. In 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari address this using the spatial concepts of smooth versus striated space. Striated space is the rigid architecture of the old world. It relies on hard borders, hierarchical walls, and strict classifications to control populations. Smooth space is the open, frictionless architecture of the modern network and globalized capital. But smooth space is a trap. The open network permits infinite movement, but only along the pre-approved, highly regulated lanes defined by capitalist axiomatics. Deregulated flows and the illusion of freedom do not represent an escape from power. They are simply the most efficient mechanisms yet devised for capturing desire and extracting surplus. Return to the digital turnstile. You scan your device, the laser glows green, and the barrier permits entry. That access-granted state is not a victory. It is not an assertion of freedom or a moment of autonomy. The green light simply confirms that your passive syntheses have been verified, your variables have been calculated, and your individual flows have been successfully captured by the apparatus. Physical chains and iron bars have been replaced by the continuous, suffocating modulation of passwords and algorithms. In a system of pure immanence, resistance cannot be achieved by fighting a central, transcendent authority. It requires finding ways to become imperceptible to the network's calculations. Recognizing ourselves not as unified individuals, but as divisible, targeted datasets is the brutal but necessary first step to surviving the society of control.